Hello and welcome to Diegetic Advancement. My name is Riley, and today we're taking another look at Chainmail, part 3. A little bit slower than my weekly schedule getting these out, but you should know by now there really isn't a schedule. It's a bit of a boon and a bane. I found the relaxed schedule a bit easier to actually achieve rather than doing something on the same day each time. But I do have to remind myself to keep on top of things, to not let it go too far. Maybe dropping down to a fortnightly format and sort of trying to schedule some things in so I've always got something in the backlog, be more manageable. But for now, we'll continue on as is. Wasn't helped by a busy week at work, but anyway, let's dig into some chainmail. This section should be interesting. We're looking at melee and morale, two sections we've had a few questions about. First, I've got quite a bit of feedback. I've got a call from Taylor over at Clerics Ringmail, Daniel from Bandits Keep, and Michael of Mirke the Meek. And of course, as always, the Pig Phantom has called in with his contribution for the read-through, which I'll play after sharing my thoughts. But first, I'll play the smaller calls. Take it away, Taylor.
Hey Riley, this is Taylor over at Clerics Ringmail, calling in to talk about chainmail. Specifically, you are reading about the scale that was involved and where the table that was recommended in the preface or introduction is what it's labeled, but the table was supposed to be a minimum of 4 feet by 8 foot in size. And that works with the bigger models, but it's hard to, and especially if you go to the wider, it says that the maximum width of a table is 7 feet, which, to be honest, I would be perfectly okay with that. Being one of the taller types, I would be able to reach and thus move my units into the center of that 7 by 8 foot space, and some of my smaller opponents might not be able to reach them. But I digress. The important part is, as confirmed in, I believe, Game Wizards, in other documentaries, the chainmail game was inspired in part by Siege of Bodenberg, which was played with elastilin figures. Elastilin and Starlux, which are referenced in the preface here, are 40 millimeter scale. The majority of bases then would likewise have been larger. If you're using 28 or 25 millimeter, which is the 1 to 72, much more common, so that's your Warhammer 40K, those are 25, 28 millimeter. They have a much smaller base size. So as you are thinking about scaling your size, consider also the impact that would have on ranges and on artillery. I won't go too deeply into artillery because you haven't gotten to that piece yet, I don't think. But think about that when it's talking about the dowels and drawing lines. The casualties that you might inflict are different. Comparing, say, a 40 millimeter base to, if you're playing on a small table, a 15 millimeter base. You may end up with double or half the casualties you had before based on area of attack. In that sense, it's kind of important too when you think about scaling the game. I 100% understand the need for a smaller space when you're gaming, because my gaming space right now is much smaller than a pool table, which is more in line with what they recommend. But with that in mind, when you have a smaller figure, say 15 millimeter or 6 millimeter, you likewise are going to usually think of them on a smaller base. And so long as that base is scaled, you should think to scale movement rates or ranges. Otherwise, you may have your army behave very differently from one table to the other. Then, at the end of the day, we'll all meet up at that 8 foot by 7 foot table with our 6 millimeter minis and reenact the Battle of Cannae. Thanks for putting up with me. Good thing to talk about, good thing to think about. Keep reading.
Thank you very much for listening and for calling in, Taylor. I think Jason mentioned it in his call on the last episode that you can always use small miniatures and therefore smaller table size. Though I didn't catch the original scale for the miniatures, so thank you for that piece of information. Being 40 millimeters, so even 25 or 28 millimeter, which is certainly the kind of standard at the moment. You need to factor in the changes for ranges and whatnot. And of course, that's also gets complicated when you start to need to change your cannon measuring sticks. So a good thing to note, and you definitely would need to scale movement down if your goal was a smaller table. For example, a light horse can move 24 inches or 30 inches on a road, so they're moving from one side to the other. If you're using a 2-foot board, even on a 4-foot width, the smaller side, light horse are moving a long way. So definitely something you need to consider. Yeah, a massive battle 6 mil on 8x7. That would be amazing to see and play. I never thought of the inherent advantage us tall folk have when playing at large tables. So I might need to upgrade the house so I can fit one myself. Thank you very much for the call. I hope you continue to listen and enjoy. Links to Clerics Ringmail, the WhisperingGM. I can't remember which is the current one. Blog and podcast will be in the show notes. Next up, I have a call from Daniel of Bandits Keep. Take it away.
Hey, Riley. Daniel from Bandits Keep calling in. I recorded a quite long message, so I'm going to try to simplify this time. Listening to your Chainmail, enjoying it a lot. So I have a couple of thoughts, and I played quite a bit of Chainmail, and I will say that I probably don't play it 100% correctly. In fact, I know I don't. I've read through the book lots of times, and it's one of those things where every time I read through it, I see new things. So I'm curious, and I'm definitely listening to see if you find something that maybe I missed. But I have a couple of thoughts on a few of the things. I don't have my book in front of me, so I'm not looking this up. This is off memory. Number one is about the morale, because you said that if I'm interpreting you right, that basically there's a penalty to the dice roll, but there's also a number penalty, like the number goes down. Well, that is because there's two different types of morale, and I believe that's how it works. So when you're doing morale for excess casualties, that's like your D&D morale where you roll 2d6. I believe that one you penalize the dice roll. At least that's how I do it. The other type of morale, post-melee morale, each unit has a number that they're worth. Like a heavy foot is worth 5, right? So if you have 10 stands of heavy foot, that's 50. I think in that case, you would that's where you subtract the number. So if it's -1, then they'd be worth 4 instead of 5. That's my understanding of it. Again, I don't have it in front of me. The other thing that I think is interesting, and I've had to interpret, and I think that I've got it right, is the catapults. I think that's a really interesting question. And I think of it like this. A catapult is a single unit, okay? So most things that are in Chainmail, if they're a single unit, if they get hit once, they're destroyed, right? So if you had one unit, so one figure of heavy foot, let's say, and they get hit, then they die, and basically you think of it, well, that's 20 men, but basically it's one unit. That's how I look at the catapult. The catapult's one unit, but it's special in the sense that it takes 4 hits to be destroyed. So it's not so much that there's 80 people there, and there's 4 people there. It's just that a catapult itself is a physical thing that needs, and each time it gets hit, it loses one of the defenders, but then once they're all hit, then the catapult itself is useless and destroyed. So that's kind of how I look at catapults. So it's still just 4. It is 4 people, but in a way you're kind of not doing 1 to 20 scale, if that makes sense. That's how I've always done it with catapults, which is only a few times, and it seems to work for me. But I'm curious if you encounter or somebody else calls in with something else to say. Now, the other thing that's interesting is there was a YouTube video I watched years ago, and I'm trying to find it again, where there's a guy and he sits there and builds those little devices that they talk about building in Chainmail, the sticks with the lines on them and everything. And he uses them, and it's actually quite cool to see. He does both the bombards, the cannons with the bouncing, and he does the catapult one, which you do like a thing where you have to I don't know if you use a string, maybe it is a stick, I can't remember, but basically you have to stick a line out in one direction, then you move it over, and then you draw a line, and it's really cool because it adds that extra depth of what we might call in the OSR world player skill, where you look down at the board and go, okay, yeah, I'm going to shoot my catapult at 12 inches. Because as far as I can tell in Chainmail, you do not pre-measure for anything, So the same thing is true for your troops. You say, I'm going to move my full movement rate this way, and then you measure it. That's kind of how I've always played and how I think that most people play chainmail that I've seen. So the catapults and bombards would track in that same way, or I keep saying bombards, but cannons. Also, one final thing, you will see that later in the book, and again, this is something I don't really use because I mostly use the fantasy supplement, you'll see that there are, in fact, levels of troop, like there's like levies or peasants or, mercenaries, and they are in there and there are different effects to them. Mostly it has to do with some rules that I believe might be optional about, like, for instance, peasants won't charge unless you roll a certain number, or otherwise they just stand there. So that's kind of your troop quality. And there is a little section as well that talks about some of the, like the one that you're having trouble pronouncing that I won't even try. They're like an actual historical troop type, and it talks a bit about them later in the book. So very cool. I'm looking forward to you getting into the rest of this. I really enjoy Chainmail a lot. And like I say, as much as I've played it, I'm sure I'm not playing it perfectly. So I'm really interested to see what you and what other people call in with as far as just thoughts and stuff. Anyways, great episode. Talk to you soon.
Thank you very much for calling in, Daniel. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to find anything new here, maybe. It does take a few reads to find everything, though, and, even then, after a few reads, I don't think you will find it all. And, I'm probably missing some context from playing. I've played a little bit of Chainmail, but not very much, so I think revisiting after some play will bring new insights. Thanks for clarifying morale. We get to that section in this episode, and you're right. Melee morale uses one system, and then other forms of morale use another. So the penalties never kind of stack. One's for melee, and the others for all the other types. So then we come to catapults. Now, I was getting ready to agree with you. It makes sense that it's just 4 men and whatever. Though maybe that's low for the number of crew. But then you said hits, 4 hits for 4 crew, and I went, I wonder how a catapult is hit. I just read through the melee section, I didn't really pick anything up, so thanks for getting me to revisit that. And crew counts as light foot. So crew can fight in melee as well as light foot, so crew must be 20 men. Otherwise, they're actually elite troops, but fight as light foot for due to their lack of numbers, right? But you don't put elite troops on catapult duty. So I think it has to be 20 men. And of course it's an abstraction, so maybe it's not exactly 20 men, but that's my interpretation. And now also the crew count isn't actually a maximum of 4. It's just you only get a bonus to its fire rate at 4. So you need at least 4 figures as crew to fire at the full rate. If you're less than that, you start getting the penalties. But you could have more. You could have 10 crew or 20 crew, whatever, and they would work as light foot. So there you go. Not a historian. It seems like a lot of men, but maybe it's closer to the truth than I realized. Maybe I probably need to do some outside research to find that out. The sticks are super cool and the measuring for catapults. It's as you say, some player skill. I've really been enjoying not pre-measuring in my games of bolt action. I think that's kind of fun. It's kind of funny though that morale. So melee and missile fire is really simple. You just roll some dice and add up your successes. You kill that many people. Morale and some edge cases make it a little bit more catapults, but more complicated. But catapults and cannons are a little bit extensive. There's a process there, so it's a interesting mix of complexity. Good to know that some of my questions are covered later on, so thanks for that. And thank you very much for calling in. Daniel, of course, is the host of Bandits Keep YouTube and podcast, and the Monster and Treasure podcast, along with KR King. Links to that will be in the show notes. Okay, next up we've got 2 calls from Mirke. I'll add some context in between them, and I'm looking at the time for this episode and going, I think I might split this into 2. I'm going to have a feedback section, and then the second episode or release will be mine and the Pink Phantom's thoughts on melee and morale. So anyway, take it away, Mirke.
Hey Riley, this is Mirke. Just calling to say I'm enjoying your Chainmail episode and also the collaboration with Pink Phantom. Thanks for that. one question, I'm probably jumping the gun on this. Just did a discussion with my daughter about the Battle of Five Armies recently. We talked about chainmail a little bit, and I'm wondering how you might stat that up and run that in chainmail. I don't think Gandalf really counts as like the wizard in that. He doesn't sling spells too often, doesn't shoot a lightning bolt or a fireball very often. He's able to fight with a sword. So I don't know if he's just like, you'd consider him a hero or something, and then like tack on a once per game or once or twice per game spell or something like that. So yeah, I mean, chainmail can handle like the dwarves and goblins and whatnot. So just kind of curious how you might do that. Maybe that's a question for when you're farther into chainmail. But once again, yeah, keep up the good work, and I'll talk to you later. Take care.
So thanks for the call, Mirke. And when Mirke called this in, I responded to him on Discord because luckily Gary has had his part to say on how to stat out the Battle of the Five Armies. In issue 60 of the Panzerfaust fanzine, he gives you a scenario to play out with the force organization for each side. And so I sent that across, and there's an article by John Peterson who sort of covers the history of that. Those will be linked in the show notes. I sent that to Mirke, and he wasn't terribly pleased with Gary's work. I'll let him speak for himself, though.
Hey, Riley. Thanks for sending me those links. It's fascinating to see how Gary Gygax portrayed the battle with chainmail, and the history, the context around it from Mr. Peterson was interesting as well. But Gary got it wrong, and it's interesting. It seems, I don't know if like the elf as an amazing archer goes back. I mean, I suppose in some ways Tolkien talks about that in the Mirkwood Forest, how the dwarves were surrounded by archers. But in the battle specifically, it does say there are archers, but it seems like there's a lot more sword and spear-based elves than there are archers. And in Gary's list, I didn't see any indication of any elf troops that weren't using bows. But here's just one paragraph. The elves were the first to charge. Their hatred for the goblins is cold and bitter. Their spears and swords shone in the gloom with a gleam of chill flame. So deadly was the wrath of the hands that held them. As soon as the host of their enemies was dense in the valley, they sent against it a shower of arrows, and each flickered as it fled, as if with stinging fire. Behind the arrows, 1,000 of their spearmen leapt down and charged. The yells were deafening. The rocks were stained black with goblin blood. So there's at least 1,000 elf spears, but it also mentions swords, and then you have the shower of arrows. So the goblin army, or not the goblin, the elf army has a good variety of troops in it that I don't think are reflected accurately in Gary Gygax's portrayal of the Battle of Five Army. I don't know. Man, Gary takes a lot of flack, doesn't he? Anywho, thanks for the links, and take care.
That is the problem with being particularly prominent, is especially in an age where all your writings can be examined for all time. So now I've been thinking about what I should do to wrap up each book in the series, or at least set of books. So in this case, Chainmail. And Mirke, you've given me a great idea here. Because you weren't happy with Gygax's order of battle, specifically the elves, as you mentioned. I would like to do as a finale of my Chainmail deep dive a battle of the Five Armies with Chainmail, and I'd like your help, Mirke, you specifically, but anyone else can feel free to chime in. Now, of course, you don't have to do this. If not, I will still play out the scenario with Gary's version. But for now, I challenge you, to submit your order of battle for playing the Battle of the Five Armies, and that could be just an army list, and I can use the sort of scenario that Gary presents, or if you'd like to throw in some scenario design in it as well, that'd be great. And I will do the same. I'll put my own together, and yeah, then I'll play it out on the tabletop. Of course, if you don't feel like doing that, any comment or a suggestion along those lines without going the full way to actually putting together a full scenario is also appreciated. At this point, there's no deadline on getting submissions or feedback along that line. It'll probably be a month away at least, but I'll try and estimate how much longer of the read through I've got, and I will I'll put a reminder in as we certainly get close. But thank you very much for the idea, Mirke. I think it'll be pretty fun. Gonna have to get my printer working to get some dwarves and elves and goblins, but they're not bad little armies to have on in your collection. Probably need to think about scale as well. I won't be printing them at 40 mil, that's for sure. So I'll also need to write my own scale conversion for the ranges and everything that like Taylor pointed out. So with that, again, thank you very much for the call, Mirke. Mirke's details will be in the show notes, and of note, he is doing sort of a analysis wrap up of the Hobbit as they went through the slow read over on the Audio Dungeon Discord. That's been very entertaining to listen to, so go check that out. With that, I'm going to put a stop here in this part of the episode, and I will release the second part, which will be the analysis by myself, and of course the collaboration, as you mentioned, Mirke, with the Pink Phantom, who I thank very much for his continued efforts to play along with me. Alrighty, thank you very much for listening, and bye for now.